Yes, it says in the sutra, and we talked about this last week, internally see your Buddha nature, externally be respectful. If you slight others, you're not free of the self. In other words, you haven't seen your Buddha nature. If you slight others, you haven't seen your Buddha nature, you haven't known who you really are. Which we noted as being a really surprising teaching, because usually, the Buddha nature, seeing your Buddha nature is this sort of lofty, meditative achievement, which seems to have nothing whatsoever to do with whether you're nice to people or respectful of people. And here he's saying these two things are completely intertwined with one another. So that, in other words, when you do slight other people, it's actually a more profound thing than you realize. It's not just shabby behavior. It's a profound sort of failure to see true reality, is kind of what he's saying. Well, I want to do again this week what I did last week, to select some passages from the sutra to comment on. As we said in the beginning of our study here, that this is a kind of a controversial sutra in that whenever you study it, most of the commentators are going on and on about how, the sutra is basically a political document. It's a polemical sutra. It's a spurious sutra. All this stuff's been added to it, and it's not really canonical. And then they go into great detail explaining the history and the politics and how the text has been corrupted over the generations and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of stuff in the sutra that I think you can see, really is there to serve those ends. But then there's also a lot of stuff in the sutra that is powerful, seminal Zen teaching. So that's why I don't feel like it's necessary to go through the whole of the sutra and discuss every part of it. And I've just gone through it impressionistically and just taken some passages that I think are worthwhile. So that's what I'm doing again tonight. And again, as I've been saying, one of the main themes of the sutra is this powerful teaching that awakening, enlightenment, true dharma, true nature, is something radically simple. It's direct, it's straightforward, it's not complicated, it's not a big deal. It's just a really direct, simple and straightforward way of being and understanding. And that all the teachings in Buddhism, which are so complicated, the three bodies of the Buddha, the pure land, the triple refuge, the Western paradise, nirvana, morality, meditation, all these things which are directly mentioned in the sutra, he keeps saying over and over again. It's just, never mind about all that. It's just cutting to the chase. It's just a direct pointing. It's just directly being your life. All those things are included in that. You don't need to bother with all this stuff. He almost debunks the entirety of the Buddhist teaching in favor of just this very simple, right here and now, not elsewhere. The Buddha is just yourself, just your own body. That's all it is. So that's, probably the key message of the sutra. And he says, over and over again, in many places in the sutra, he says the only reason why you have all these complicated techniques and step-by-step teachings is because some people are slow and they seem to need this stuff. But we are much more quick and we're more intelligent, we're the elite, and we don't need any of that. We can just go right to it. So he seems to say that, many, many times, and who knows whether there was a person who was the sixth ancestor who actually felt this way. But whether or not there was, I think we should say at the outset tonight that insofar as this was somebody's attitude, and insofar as an attitude like that does exist in the Zen tradition, as a strain of thinking in the Zen tradition, that it's actually an incredibly arrogant attitude. One has to admit it's amazingly arrogant. Well, all these poor people over here that he dismisses, thousands of years of Buddhist tradition, they're all slow-witted, Only now that I've come along, can we be smart enough to get the essence of it all. And I just want to make it clear that Dogen actually didn't like this text for that reason, and Suzuki Roshi didn't particularly follow it. And following their teachings, I think that we can say that this is not, I hope anyway, this is not our attitude. I think that I certainly embrace the idea that essentially Dharma is simple and straightforward. It isn't a complicated matter, a very profound, very big deal that we have to spend our lifetime, blah, blah, and so on. It's very simple. It's just living. It's just being honest and true and straightforward in our living, and living deeply and seeing deeply. I really agree with the sixth ancestor on that point. But I think that the elaboration of the teachings and all that is not just something to be dismissed. It's something that, in our practice we really honor, not only all of the Buddhist teachings and Buddhist traditions, but other traditions as well. Not that these things are just expedient devices for the slow-witted, but in fact I see them, and I think we see them, as the tremendous variety of manifestations of the human need for meaning in spiritual practice. There's an endless need that we human beings have to make meaning and a sense of dignity to our living, and we need a whole bunch of different approaches that answer our various needs. So, I think I'm always uncomfortable when I read the sutra and see the sixth ancestor being so dismissive of all this. So in a way, I think our practice is like his in the appreciation of the directness and simplicity of the teachings, and at the same time, we do practice a lot of the gradual teachings. We do a lot of cultivation of states of mind and so forth and so on. We practice both ways. And clearly, the positive aspect of Huineng's attitude is that when we're tempted to kind of fly off into lofty spiritual realms and realms of great color and complexity, he's all the time bringing us back to the concrete simplicity of our own lives. So the first teaching I want to bring up is on page 30 of Red Pine's text. This is the part where he's talking about the Western paradise. It was a doctrine in Buddhism that it was very difficult to practice and get enlightened here in this realm. So one really good thing to do would be to pray to be reborn after this life in the Western paradise, the paradise of Amida Buddha, Amitabha, where conditions were much more conducive to spiritual practice. We all know how difficult it is to have a calm mind, and we're busy, we have to go to work, the body doesn't work right, we're tired, we're in a bad mood. It's very hard to keep continuity of spiritual practice. Well, this is not the case in the Western paradise. In the Western paradise, everything is set up perfectly so that you can really practice. So maybe no need to worry so much in this life, maybe no need to try too hard to practice and become awakened. Just pray to Amida Buddha to be reborn in that realm, and then when you get there, you'll really be able to practice and become awakened. So this was actually an important doctrine in Mahayana Buddhism, and there were and are still today schools of Buddhism that teach this. The largest school actually used to be the case. I don't know what the statistics are now, but the largest school of Buddhist schools in Japan are schools that follow that teaching. So here, the sixth ancestor completely revises that teaching, and he says, I'm going to now show you, right here and now, the Western paradise. So you don't have to die and be reborn there. I'm going to show it to you right here. And everybody's amazed by this. So on page 30, he says, in the middle, it's a pretty lengthy speech, I'm not going to read it all, but in the middle of this, he says, all of you should listen carefully. Everybody's physical body is a city. Your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin are the gates of the city. These 5 gates are on the outside, and on the inside is the gate of intellect or consciousness. Your mind is the kingdom, and your nature is the king, your Buddha nature. When your Buddha nature is there, so is the king or queen. When your nature is gone, the king or queen is also gone. When your nature is present, your body and mind are present. When your nature is absent, your body and mind cease to exist. The Buddha is the creation of your nature. Don't look outside your body. When you're blind to your own nature, the Buddha becomes an ordinary being. When you're aware of your own nature, an ordinary being becomes a Buddha. So, this is the way he's sort of beginning to redefine the Pure Land, and you know what he's going to say. The Pure Land is not elsewhere. The Pure Land is right here. When your mind is aware of your own nature, when you know who you really are, then the Pure Land is right here. So down toward the bottom of the page. When poisonous thoughts end, meaning deluded, counterproductive thoughts, which are all too common in the human mind, when such thoughts end, the denizens of the deep vanish. When the Tathagata of your enlightened nature shines the light of wisdom on the land of your mind, the 6 gates shine with purity, and the realms of the 6 desires become transparent. The 3 poisons of greed, hate, and delusion, which are sort of the basic root confusion of human beings, they disappear. The hells all vanish. Inside and outside are perfectly clear and no different from the Western paradise. Unless you practice like this, how are you going to get there? So the Western paradise, which we thought was elsewhere, and we had this whole mythology about prayers to be reborn there and so on and so forth. It's just clarifying your own nature, clarifying your own thoughts. Then he goes on to say, when you think about it, throughout Asia, history in Asia, it was a kind of a commonplace notion that in order to really practice and become awakened, you needed to be in a monastery, you needed to kind of completely turn over your life to the practice, because ignorance was very deep and it was not so easy to overcome. So lay people were praying for better rebirths. Monastics were hoping for awakening in this life or the next. But the logic is that if the teaching is as he says it is, and it's very direct and straightforward and simple, it's one heartbeat away at any moment, it's not a whole complicated thing, then what difference does it make if you are a monastic or a layperson? And I think that the Sixth Ancestor is one of the first to actually say directly that it's not necessary to be a monastic. And he says, good friends, you can practice this at home. They say, don't try this at home. He says, you can try this at home. You can do this at home. It doesn't require living in a monastery. If you live in a monastery and you don't practice, then you're just like people in the Western paradise who are confused, and they might as well not be in the Western paradise. on the other hand, if you practice at home, then you're like the people who are not in the Western paradise, who do good things, and because they do good things, they are in the Western paradise anyway. So it's not a matter of where you are, it's a matter of the state of your mind. So you can do this at home. And then he says, the magistrate who's been his interlocutor here stands up and says, well, how do you do this at home? And he says, well, I composed a verse. Just recite this verse and practice it, and that's all you have to do. So then he spontaneously breaks into poetry. And I'll read you a little bit of his verse. There must be 10,000 ways to explain it, but all are based on one rule. In your dark house of afflictions, keep the sun of wisdom shining. In your dark house of afflictions, keep the sun of wisdom shining. Falsehood arrives because of afflictions, these grasping emotional and mental states. When truth appears, afflictions vanish. Letting truth and falsehood be, there's nothing left to purify. So, we think conventionally, we have so much confusion in us, so much desire, so much negativity, so much bad conditioning. We'll really have to go to therapy for 100 years and do a lot of meditation to get over this. But he says, no, just right there in your house of afflictions, let the light of wisdom shine. And as soon as you do that, the afflictions depart. You just let both true and false alone. Both afflictions and goodness, let them alone. And there'll be nothing left to purify. Everything will immediately be pure. And this is very much like the poem that he gives in the story of his career as a monk. Enlightenment is already pure. It's already there in you, purified. But the thought of enlightenment is delusion. So everything we think about awakening, all our projections, all our concepts are delusion. But the awakening itself is already pure in us. So enlightenment is already pure. The thought of it is a delusion. But inside delusion is purity. Even there, at the heart of those conceptions, is purity. Because really all of our confused notions about spirituality all come from our spiritual need, right? Our desire for awakening, which is the purity of our own hearts, sort of speaking through a distorted voice in us. Once truth removes the three obstructions, if you follow the way in this world, let nothing block your path. Paying attention to your own mistakes will keep you in step with the way. Paying attention to your own mistakes will keep you in step with the way. That's interesting, huh? So, what's the practice? The practice is your own mistakes. Paying attention to your own mistakes. Just being aware of them. Like Charlie was saying, you are aware of what's going on, and the whole thing changes. You're in another world. So the path is a path of mistakes, a path of studying the afflictions, not removing them or not improving them, but studying them. People who truly follow the way don't consider the faults of the world. Those who consider the wrongs of the world only add to their own. I don't condemn the faults of others. My own wrongs are what I'm after. Just get rid of thoughts about wrongs, and all your afflictions will shatter. people who truly follow the way don't consider the faults of the world. Those who consider the wrongs of the world only add to their own. I don't condemn the faults of others. My own wrongs are what I'm after. So this is a very surprising, radical
Bravo.
teaching. Yeah.
What's not
Yeah.
to like about this? I mean, the
Yeah,
guy's
yeah.
got, I don't see any contradiction in any of this stuff.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
decent approach.
Yeah, no.
Was it just get rid of your thoughts and what was it?
He says, people who truly follow the way don't consider the faults of the world. Those who consider the wrongs of the world only add to their own. I don't condemn the faults of others. My own wrongs are what I'm after. Just get rid of thoughts about wrongs and all your afflictions will shatter. So, when you first hear this, I see that some of you are very enthusiastic about it, but and I am too, don't get me wrong. But when you first hear it, it sounds a little disturbing, maybe. At least it does to me. Because, what? You ignore the faults of the world? You kind of accept? Should we sort of just ignore the rest of the world, just accept whatever the way it is and don't think about it? I think we all agree that we do need to not ignore our own faults and constantly be running around worried about the state of the world or what other people are doing and not paying attention to what we're doing. Obviously, we do need to pay attention to what we're doing and to our own problems and faults. We do need to, it's a mistake to be so outwardly focused that we're completely a mess inside. But it does seem extreme to say that we should so focus on our own faults, that we ought to entirely ignore all the wrongs of the world or all the things that are wrong with others. And in the end, he says, we shouldn't even have a single thought about any of that. So this seems, in a way, one could criticize this, I think, for being a little bit solipsistic, forget about the rest of the world, just think about yourself. But I think those of you who are enthusiastic about this teaching see, as I do, that there's something more to it than that. I don't think he means that at all, although it could sound like that. I could listen to it with someone else's ears, and I could see that it could sound like that. And so I think that it's actually a deeper question than these words might at first suggest. Remember, earlier in the sutra, we remarked on a passage where he talks about inside and outside, where he says that in effect, the automatic conceptual framework on which all of us operate is that the skin is the dividing line. I'm on the inside of it, everything else is on the outside of it, and that's a fundamental reality. And what he says is that's not a fundamental reality, that is a designation. That is an organizing principle conceptually, but it doesn't actually fit the case of how reality really functions in our lives. And when we are mesmerized by that conceptual principle and take it as a fundamental reality, we get into trouble. So when you remember that, then this saying becomes quite different. Inside, outside, self, other are conventions, designations, and not realities. So if we apply this here, we would understand the passage differently. And I think this is what the sixth ancestor really means. He's saying, in effect, look more deeply at what is going on. Look more deeply at what's actually wrong, inside and outside. See more deeply what the fault may be. See through your fears and your confusion, and see if you can look squarely at life's issues. It's a little bit like this homework of last week. So many times when I hear people being upset about the state of the world, and goodness knows there's plenty to be upset about in the state of the world, I think that they're telling me about themselves. They're telling me about how upset they are about their feelings and their sense of their own lives in the context of this world. And so it goes both ways. See through that and be suspicious of your despair or your self-righteousness or your analysis of the character of others, your analysis of the world, and look more intimately, more closely at what's actually going on in your thinking and in your feeling. Be more honest about yourself, he's telling us, and more intimate with your experience. See through and behind your views and frameworks. And when you do that, as he says, all your problems will shatter and dissolve. And then you'll be able to deal with what's actually going on, both inside of you and outside of you. So he's not telling you to avoid the world, he's telling you to go more deep in terms of how you view self and other, how you view yourself in the world. Later on in the section of the sutra that's coming up in a few pages, where he ends his, as we said before, the structure of the sutra is first his biography, then a long sermon that's given in the context of an ordination ceremony, then that ceremony ends, and then we have some dialogues that take place later on between Huineng and others. And this teaching about don't pay attention to the faults of others, look at your own faults, follow your own mistakes, that's the path. A variation on that teaching is given here on one of these dialogues that takes place on page 39. And Jeff, in his talk, spoke a lot about Shen Hui, who was a monk who was an early disciple of Huineng, who was responsible for sort of elevating Huineng's status and using the sutra here, this document of the sutra, as a kind of polemical way of increasing the stature of Huineng. So this is a story about that monk, Shen Hui. Page 39, number 44. There was another monk by the name of Shen Hui. He was from Nanyang. And when he came to Caoqi mountain to pay his respects, which is where that's another name for Huineng. Sometimes he's called Caoqi because that's his mountain where he lived. When he came to Caoqi, he said, "When the master meditates, does he see or not?" And the master got up and hit Shen Hui 3 times. Whack, whack, whack. And then he asked him, "When I hit you, does it hurt or not?" Shen Hui answered, "It hurt and it didn't hurt." And the 6th ancestor said, "Well, I see and I don't see." So Shen Hui asked the master again, "What do you mean you see and you don't see?" The master said, "As for I see, what I always see are my own faults. So I say I see. And as for I don't see, what I don't see are the faults of others, either on heaven or in earth, on earth or in heaven. So I see and I don't see. What do you mean it hurt and it didn't hurt?" And Shen Hui says, "If it didn't hurt, I would be the same as a lifeless stick or a rock. And if it hurt, I would be the same as an ordinary person, still subject to anger." This is a kind of interesting dialogue. This begins to sound like the Zen dialogues that we know from the later tradition. And it's the same teaching that's being expressed in the poem that we just read. So this has a great personal meaning for me, because when I first read this years ago, I really practiced with this line, "I see and I don't see." And one aspect of it is, I think that there are no others. There are no others. There's nothing but the faults of oneself, because the whole world is oneself. So all faults are one's own faults. But as a provisional practice, when I read this years ago, to train my mind, I actually tried to practice this. I actually tried literally to not see the faults of others. When there seemed to be some fault of others, I would ignore it. and I would look very closely for my own faults. And if I did see that someone was at fault, or I thought someone was at fault, then I tried to just forget about that and let that go, and instead look inside myself. And I found it a very, very powerful practice. It really kind of turned my mind around, changed my way of being in the world and looking at the world. Now, again, this could sound like it's sort of promoting a kind of universal guilt trip, Forget about everybody else, just feel bad about yourself, all the time. And I don't think that's what it's saying. It's not telling you to be guilty or to reinforce whatever sense of lack of self-worth you may be starting out with. But as a training device to kind of show you how distorted the way you're seeing the world is, it really is helpful to kind of do this sort of mental yoga practice. And it can be very interesting and very revolutionary in showing you, just to use Charlie's phrase, a whole new world opening up all of a sudden, quite different from the world you just automatically took for granted as being the way it is for you. So just like, I was in a yoga class the other night, and in yoga class, they tell you to do these, things that you would never, do, stretching and moving your body in extreme ways, right? Unusual ways. But that's a training device, right? That has an impact on the way that you would be in your body at any other time. So in a similar way, you can take a kind of conceptual or mental yoga and decide to run your mind along another track besides the one that it automatically wants to go on, and see what happens. See how you can stretch your mind and stretch your heart and stretch your view. So that's what I did.
Give an example of how you did this and
Well, let's just say, take a simple example of, you're having a disagreement with someone, and look how they're wrong, and why are they saying that? What's the matter with them? Why are they doing that? And you just stop that. You put that down, and you say, no. Where's my fault? So in the ordinary everyday reality, they may well have been at fault. It doesn't matter. You're not saying that they're not. You're saying, no. For training purposes, I'm just going to let that go, and I'm going to look and see and find out where I'm at fault. And then you look at you'd work with that situation in a completely different way than the way you ordinarily might, and you see something different. And maybe later on, you do return to ordinary discourse and ordinary way of looking at things, but now you've stretched yourself, and you see that differently because you've stretched your mind in that way. So, yeah.
When I heard that, what I was thinking of was there's a story from one of the sutras of, I believe it's Shariputra coming to the Buddha and saying, why does the world seem so dark and rough and difficult? And the Buddha says, well, I'll show you the world I see. And he puts his big toe on the ground, and it's like the world is a paradise.
Yeah.
And it seems like, there's that kind of effort you're describing, but there's also, sort of like that the world we see is truly being seen through our afflictions. It's not
right.
the true world.
Right. Right.
And it seems like that's part of what he's saying too.
Oh yeah. The Buddha's making that magic act is like Huineng saying, just see. Exactly. Yeah. That's the Buddha's sudden enlightenment. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we can do that in a moment. But, I'm making use, in a sense, of that saying, for this purpose. Yeah. I forgot that story. That's a great story. Yeah. Yeah. I want to say a word about Shenhui's saying here about it hurts and it doesn't hurt, which is a little bit of a different point. It hurts. We are not trying to practice to avoid feeling pain, physical pain or emotional pain. Because if we were beings who didn't, couldn't, wouldn't feel physical or emotional pain, we would really be no longer human. So we want to feel pain. That's bodhisattva practice, to feel pain. But also, We want to be free of the pain that we're feeling. We don't want to be entangled in the pain. That's the whole point of Dharma, is to awaken from our dream of entanglement in pain. So we want to be free of our clinging to the pain. Sometimes our clinging to the pain takes the form of hating it, wanting to get rid of it. So in this way, we can appreciate our life. We can appreciate self and others. We can be happy, and we can have some good feeling for others with a minimum of entanglement. And this is, in a way, not unlike, although it's different a little bit, it's not unlike the sixth ancestor's practice of seeing and not seeing, in the sense that it may be that the sixth ancestor, when he says he doesn't see the faults of others, maybe what he really means by that is, I may see the faults of others, but I don't dwell on them. I don't cling to them. I don't define other people by their faults. I see things clearly when things are messed up. I know they're messed up. I'm not naive, but I just don't cling to that view or focus on that as I might. I let go of it. So this might be not seeing. Not seeing might not be necessarily blindness. It might be seeing, but letting go. Seeing, but not being pushed around or limited by seeing. Just returning, seeing something, and returning to being present, not being reactive to it. So, not seeing might actually be seeing without holding on, just like in the Heart Sutra when it says there's no eyes. The Zen teacher Dongshan, when he was a little boy, he said, I just chanted the Heart Sutra and it says no eyes, but what's this? I have eyes. The Heart Sutra doesn't mean to deny that there are eyes. The Heart Sutra just means don't hold on in the eyes. That's no eyes. When Dogen says drop body and mind, he doesn't mean disappear in a puff of smoke. He means give up your clinging to body and mind. When you're not clinging and holding on to body and mind and willing to let go moment after moment, there is no more body and mind. So I think that's also an aspect of what the sixth ancestor means. So one or two more here. On page 34, there's this funny story about, this is another sort of polemical part where Shenshu, the guy who was the head monk who lost the poetry contest, that guy. He's now teaching in the north, and he heard that the sixth ancestor has this unusual way of teaching in the south, so he sends a spy down. Anybody here a spy from a rival Dharma center? Some faces in the crowd I'm not sure of. So. Anyway, so the spy shows up, and he it took him half a month, and he reaches Shaoqi Mountain, and he meets the master, and he pays his respects. Doesn't say where he's from. He just sits and listens. But as soon as he heard the master teach, he understood, and he right away returned, just in hearing the talk, to his original mind. So he was awakened. Now, again, I often say, you think when you hear that, it sounds pretty exotic, like, wow, some incredible stars went off and rockets went flying in his head, and he was never the same afterward. And we project onto it something really spectacular, but I think that it's not, the same thing happens to us. Sometimes you hear the teaching once, and you realize, that's it. That's really true. Yes, I never heard this before in my life, but that's exactly right. That's what I always knew, and I never knew it before. And it doesn't have to be some spectacular mystical experience, but it's really pretty thoroughgoing. You know that, and then your life never is the same after that. So it actually is pretty spectacular. It's just that it's not Walt Disney Technicolor, which is, I think, the way we project our minds onto it. But anyway, that happened to him. So he stood up and he bowed, and he said, I actually came from Shenshu's place. He fesses up. And when I was there, I didn't understand anything so wonderful as this. But as soon as you open your mouth, I grasped my real nature. And I hope you will be compassionate and let me stay here for instructions. And so Huineng said, well, if you're from over there, then you must be a spy. And he said, I'm not a spy. And the sixth ancestor said, well, how can you not be a spy? And he said, well, before I spoke, I was a spy. Before I opened my mouth and said this, I was a spy. But now that I've said this, I'm not a spy anymore. And the sixth ancestor said, it's the same with, and it's a quotation, it's the same with affliction is enlightenment. As he said himself earlier in his poem. He said, this is what it means when I said affliction is enlightenment. So that's another interesting little story. These stories they're fun and they're funny, I think. So let's say that we're all spies. I think we are, I think we're all spies. We're all, the average person is a spy, is a conspirator, and a voyeur of his or her own life. Sort of standing on the outside, like looking in, to seeing what kind of information they can get on it. To be a spy, to be standing on the outside, looking in at our life, is to be beset by our afflictions. To be so mesmerized by our confusion that we take them, we take our afflictions and our flaws as fundamentally real, and then we really seem to have problems. But when we see this teaching of the sixth ancestor, afflictions are enlightenment, which we can see when we stop looking at the faults of others. Sometimes the others are ourselves. We're standing outside of ourselves, looking at our own faults as if we were looking at another person. When we can actually get inside of ourselves, we don't see our faults in the same way. We see them with much more understanding and sympathy. And we understand that they're manifestations of awakening. And then we're not spies anymore. We see that no one's at fault, not us or anyone else. So now we're not spies anymore. We're fully inside the circle of our lives. And this is what the sixth ancestor calls speaking. We speak our lives. Now we can speak our actual lives. Before I spoke, I was a spy. But now that I can speak my actual life, because I'm standing within it now, I'm not a spy anymore. So I think that's the teaching that I get out of this. But also to take a step back from that and say that this is a great example of how in Zen literature you frequently see this kind of thing, where a very ordinary, on one level, one thing is being said, but the dialogue takes it to another level. So on one level, we're talking about where does he come from, and is he actually a spy? And on another level, we're talking about an unspeakably intimate spiritual practice. It's like Jajo saying, have you eaten breakfast yet? Wash your bowls. He's talking about breakfast, and he's talking about bowls, but he's also talking about spiritual awakening and daily life, taking care of your practice every moment. So, I like that little story. And there's lots of them. Yeah, John.
Well, I was just going to say that's one of the issues about seeing your own faults. I mean, many times they seem subtle to you, and you only see your own faults through other people, or in interaction with other people, or maybe sometimes the pain you're causing other people, or whatever. So I mean, it gets back to the question you were asking, us.
Right.
It's true. You can feel many times it's because of the pain, or the difficulty you're causing other people that you're able to see some of your own stuff.
Yeah.
And your own separation.
Yeah. So then all of our troubles and worries and controversies with others are really helpful for our practice. Yeah, and it's really about helping us to understand. Yeah. Charlie, and then Laura.
In the poem, is the mistake that he's at one level is the mistake that he's asking us to take up the notion that we believe that spying will work?
Well, yeah. I mean, we not only that, we don't even know we're spying. We think that's the way it is. Yeah. And we think
noticing the spying.
Right, and we think somehow that it's going to work out. Right.
And I know for myself that I'm completely convinced that spying will work.
Yeah. Right.
By that you mean what? Looking.
Spying would work.
Right.
Yeah.
Even of oneself, looking outside.
Yeah.
into one's own.
Yeah. I mean, in other words, standing outside oneself and looking at oneself, we so take for granted as a way of being, and we're somehow going to fix it. Yeah, right. A way of working with it, and we're going to fix our problems by standing outside and spying on ourselves and
with our awareness.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we're going to be standing next to ourselves, aware of ourselves, and that's going to work. It's not going to work. No.
Well, it seems to be lots counter to awareness practice, so it's so touted by our teachers sometimes.
Well, awareness practice, as we do it in Zen, is being inside, not standing outside looking. Yeah, Laura.
I was thinking that when I get annoyed by things that other people do, often when I look at it, I realize, because I noticed that the reason I'm annoyed at what they did is because it's actually something that I do myself, but I don't approve of it.
Right.
And I don't like it in myself, but it's easier to get annoyed at someone else.
Right.
So I think a little bit that's what it means by don't look at the fault of others, look at yourself.
Yeah.
It's like you're seeing it and getting annoyed at the other, but really you don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true, and I think most of us could notice that too in ourselves. It's the most common thing. Yeah, what would it be like to just not go down that well-traveled road, take a step back, and turn the light on ourselves? It would be a very different. To change that habit around things would be very different.
So it goes to your question of, well, how do you treat yourself in relation to how you treat others? Well, you get mad at others, so what do? When you find that, odious
Yeah.
thing in yourself?
Yeah.
You don't want to treat yourself that way either.
Right. And if you could forgive yourself and see that as a manifestation of your true nature, you might see the same in others and be a lot more patient with them. Mm-hmm. Well, I have one more short passage which leads us to a conversation. And a whole lot of, remember, there's all kinds of complexities around this text. A lot of stuff was added to it over the generations. And in fact, the PlatformSutra that was mostly read throughout Asia, China, and Japan was not this version. This is a version that somebody stumbled on in a cave, you remember, a long time, some centuries, 1,000 years later, actually. The text with all these additions is the one that circulated. So, in an appendix in the back of the book, Red Pine translates a lot of the additional material that doesn't appear in the main body of the text. And there's tons of these encounter stories that aren't in the Dunhuang version. So I'm just going to read you one because this was a story that was really important to Dogen. And maybe sometime we'll remember to get around to reading Dogen's extensive commentaries on this story. It's on page 285. Zen master Haizhang was a son of the Du family of Qinzhou province. He first called on National Master Huiyan on Mount Sung, but Huiyan sent him to Zhaoqi, which is the sixth ancestor. And when he came to pay his respects, the master said to him, "Where are you coming from?" So again, a simple, ordinary question that could be taken as a very profound question. And Hai Rang takes it as a simple question. I'm coming from Mount Sung. So the master kind of queries him again, well, what kind of a thing is it that comes from there? Who is this? What is this that comes to me from Mount Sung? Now Hai Rang gets the idea that he's asking a deeper question, so he replies, to call it a thing is to miss the mark. The master said, can it be cultivated or experienced? And Hai Rang said, it's not that it isn't cultivated or experienced, but rather that it can't be corrupted or defiled. And the master said, it's just because it isn't corrupted or defiled that it's treasured by all the Buddhas. You are like this, and I'm like this. So that's the dialogue. There's different translations of that, and the translation is important, but I don't want to get into those complexities now. Maybe when we talk about it at length sometime, we'll get into that. But just a very brief word on this teaching. So, what is it that comes? Can it be cultivated or experienced? It's not that it cannot be cultivated or experienced, but it's just that it cannot be corrupted or defiled. In other words, yes, there's cultivation, there's experience, there are things that we can do and know and understand and develop in practice. And that's all in the world of distinctions and categories. And yes, that all exists. But this true nature of ours goes beyond those categories. It cannot be messed up. Whether we are successful in our practice or not is really immaterial. Because we make effort, but at the same time our real nature is beyond distinctions, defilements, corruptions. So, as I always say, it means that we have to make effort in practice, and we do make effort in practice, but we don't need to worry about it. We don't need to measure it. We don't need to compare. We don't need to feel good about it or bad about it. We just need to do it in the faith that it's coming from our real nature, which cannot be diminished in any way. So we had some discussion already about I see and I don't see. But let's now get into that more deeply, this teaching of I see and I don't see. So let's do groups of 3. Can you just find some folks right around where you are sitting and move your chairs around?